download our Revise It Right revision app for hundreds of videos, quizzes, exam questions, tutor support and so much more. This video is about photosynthesis and the uses of glucose. Now, photosynthesis is the reaction that produces glucose from light. So the plant takes in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and it combines this with water that it takes from the soil to produce glucose, which it then uses for various things, and we'll talk about this in a second, plus oxygen, which diffuses out of the stomata into the atmosphere. So as I just said, the carbon dioxide diffuses through the stomata, so it comes from the atmosphere, and the water diffuses it into the roots from the soil. The glucose has many uses, and we're going to talk about these in a second, and then the oxygen can diffuse out into the atmosphere. Now this uses energy from the sun. It uses light energy from the sun, and it is therefore an endothermic reaction. Okay, this means that more energy is transferred from the environment than is given back to or given out to the environment. Again, you'll learn about this in more detail in chemistry. But for now, just be aware that an endothermic reaction takes in more energy than it gives out. Okay, and that's why it's an endothermic reaction. It needs more energy from the light than it gives out. Okay, you may also be asked to recognise the symbol equation for photosynthesis. So carbon dioxide is CO2 plus water, which is H2O, plus glucose, which is C6H12O6, plus oxygen, which is O2. However, this isn't balanced, so we have to remember the balance symbol equation. So 6 carbon dioxide, 6 water, and 6 oxygen. And that is the balanced symbol equation for photosynthesis that you may need to have to recognise. Okay, so we've just talked about this glucose and we haven't really talked about what that's for. So let's now go on to talking about. Remember to download our Revise It Right revision app, watch over 700 videos, answer 4,000 plus quiz questions, over 1,000 flashcards, 1,000 exam questions, worksheets, forums, and get help from qualified teachers and so much more. The link is in the description. So the uses of glucose. Okay, so if I write glucose here in the middle. Now obviously a main use of glucose, as you should be aware if you've looked at respiration, is in respiration. Okay, and then we'll talk about more of that in our respiration videos in a couple of videos time. But for now, a big use of the glucose is for respiration, which transfers energy from the glucose to be used in the plant for lots of different processes. Okay, glucose can also be used to make cellulose. Okay, now you'll remember that cellulose is what plant cell walls are made out of. Okay, so again, this is another very, very important. The glucose is converted into cellulose for making the strong plant cell walls. Another use of the glucose is to be converted into amino acids. Okay, so it's combined with nitrate ions. So nitrate ions plus the glucose combine to make amino acids. And then these amino acids then form to make proteins. You'll remember from a previous video that proteins are made up of amino acids. So the amino acids form to make proteins. The glucose can also be stored as fats and oils. Okay, which turn into lipids, and it's for storing in seeds. Okay, so the glucose can also be converted into lipids, like fats and oils, to be converted and to be used and stored in seeds. And finally, it can be stored as starch. Okay, it's stored as starch in the roots and the stems and in the leaves, ready for when photosynthesis isn't happening. So for example, at winter or at night time, when there isn't as much photosynthesis taking place, the plant can then break down this starch back into glucose to then be used in respiration. Okay, so it's very important that it has this starch storage that is for times when photosynthesis cannot happen. It's like a backup. So really there we've looked at all the uses of the glucose, and we looked at very briefly the equation for photosynthesis and all the bits and bobs of that. So now I want you to have a go at answering these questions. Okay, so we'll go for the answers after, so pause the video now. Okay, so let's go through these questions. So what are the reactants in photosynthesis? So reactants being the things that we are using initially in photosynthesis, the things on the left-hand side of the equation. Okay, so if we go back to the equation, these here are the reactants, all right, whereas these here are the products. Okay, so that tells you that the reactants of photosynthesis are carbon dioxide and water. They're the reactants of photosynthesis. Now, where does photosynthesis take place in the cell? Well, we looked at that in a previous video, so hopefully you remember that it takes place in the chloroplast. And what part of the cell absorbs sunlight? Well, that is the chlorophyll. So you find chlorophyll in the chloroplast, which is that green pigment, and that's what actually absorbs the sunlight. So 3 uses of glucose in plants. We looked at 5, so any 3 from there. So you've got respiration. You've got to be stored as starch to make cellulose, to be converted into amino acids, and also stored as lipids. Fats and lipids to be stored in seeds. What chemicals used to test for starch? Again, a bit of a throwback. We use iodine. And if it goes black, then that means that starch is present. Next question, what is the function of the guard cell? Again, another bit of a throwback question. To open and close, or to control the opening and closing of the stomata. And finally, why is photosynthesis an endothermic reaction? And that is because it takes in more energy than it gives off during the reaction. And as I say, you will learn more about that in chemistry, but for now, because it takes in more energy than it gives off during the reaction. So we've now there learned about photosynthesis, the equation, the reactants, the products, where it takes place, which is the chloroplast, what absorbs sunlight, which is the chlorophyll, and then the uses of glucose. So you can now test yourself using the quiz and going through the exam questions. As ever, if there's anything you didn't understand, if you're a paying member, then please contact one of our tutors and we will certainly help you out.